Good evening, and welcome to the Fireside Reading Series, brought to you by the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. I'm Peter Borgen, manager of the Hamline Midway Library. The past couple of years have taken us away from the in-person gatherings that inspired the name Fireside, but we are still so pleased to be able to join you online to share the stories of our Minnesotan neighbors. Last year, hundreds of you gathered virtually for this series, and we are pleased to have you with us again. We look forward to the time that we can again gather at our library and share stories in person. We are excited to share with you that we are working with neighbors and community to create a vision to transform the Hamline Midway Library into a space that meets the needs and wants of the whole community now and for the next generation. St. Paul Public Library has a bold, community-centered vision for its library buildings: to create spaces that are safe, inviting, affirming, and comfortable for people of all cultures, abilities, and communities. At the end of last year, Mayor Carter proposed and the City Council passed a budget that includes substantial investment to transform the Hamline Midway Library. We invite you to co-create and co-design the library of the future. Visit our website, www.sppl.org, to learn more and sign up for our newsletter to stay up to date on opportunities to join in shaping the future of this location. We look forward to working with all of you.
Finding video. Hello, everyone. I'm so happy to be here this evening for this event in the Fireside Reading Series with Michael Kleber-Diggs this evening. And as we get started, I would like to acknowledge the Dakota people as Indigenous keepers of the land from which I'm broadcasting tonight. This land was reserved by the Dakota in the Treaty of Traverse des Sioux, signed with the United States in 1851, and it remains sacred to them today. We also acknowledge the Ojibwe people as fellow Indigenous inhabitants of this land. The Dakota and Ojibwe peoples are the original stewards of stories in this place now called Minnesota, and we at the Friends honor that tradition and the knowledge and values embedded in it as we work to lift up storytellers in our state today. The Fireside Reading Series is the Friends' longest-running program, celebrating 28 seasons in partnership with the Hamline Midway Library. Fireside is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a grant from the Metropolitan Regional Arts Council, thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, and special thanks to our newest sponsor, our neighbors down Snelling, Minnesota United. We are so grateful for your support and your presence here this evening. We will begin with a reading from Michael and then open things up to questions from you. Please do put your questions in the chat throughout the evening. I have some prepared and some that came in with the advanced registrations, but the chat is there for you to ask questions of Michael. So we have partnered with Next Chapter Bookseller in St. Paul, and they have created a page for our featured books, and we will be providing book sales at the in-person event at the end of February. So do check them out if you feel inclined to pick up any of the books. And so now I'm very happy to introduce to you Michael Kleber-Diggs. Michael is a poet and essayist. His work has appeared in the Rumpus and Lit Hub and Potomac Review and Rain Taxi, as well as many other journals and anthologies. He is the winner of the Max Ritvo Poetry Prize for his first collection, Worldly Things. Michael teaches poetry and creative nonfiction through the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop and around schools in the area. So Michael, welcome.
Thank you so much.
I'm really happy to, really happy to have this conversation with you tonight. And I'm wondering if you would like to begin with poems and get the sort of the voice and the tone of the book.
Yes. Thank you so much. I'm going to begin with one new poem, and then I'll read from the book. Groundhog Day for Amir Locke. City of lakes, city of mistakes, city that breaks, city of aches, city of aches, city of snakes, city of flakes. Perhaps now you think of snow, of whiteness descending as it does here every year, draping everything, of blindness, iciness, of your particular version of blue, of slipperiness. Perhaps you will consider how cold it gets here, and how, without adequate protection, the same specific people die from exposure here, while you claim shelter in your progressive city, city of fakes. Just saying you crave this darkness, how right it is for hibernation inside your safe, warm homes, beneath your bulletproof blankets. What harm would come for you? What harm would come for you? Awaken to your ruins, Mill City, Kill City. Get up, as though your door had been caved in. There's work to do. These streets, as they are, won't allow some safe passage. Hazardous conditions. And now I think of shoveling. The shoveling we do here ad infinitum, of clearing away of earth that must be moved. The hole that stays a hole, and the hole that holds the casket. The casket that holds the body you could have held, but wouldn't. Should have held, but didn't. A child of your city, confined here now forever, but gaining sanctuary at last. City that forsakes, city that takes, city of wakes. America is loving me to death. America is loving me to death. Loving me to death slowly, and I mainly try not to be disappeared here. Knowing she won't pledge even tolerance in return. Dear God, I can't offer allegiance. Right now, 400 years ago, far into the future, it's difficult to ignore or forgive how despised I am here, and have been in the centuries I've been here. Despised in the design of the flag and in the fealty it demands, lest I be made an example of. In America, there's one winning story, no adaptations. The story imagines a noble, grand progress where we're all united. Like truths are as self-evident as the Declaration states, or like they would be, if not for detractors like me. The ranks of vagabonds existing to point out what's rotten in America, insisting her gains come at a cost, reminding her who pays and negating wild notions of exceptionalism, adding ugly facts to God's favorite nation mythology. Look, victors get spoils. I know the memories of the vanquished fade away. I hear the enduring republic, erect and proud, asking through ravenous teeth, who do you riot for? Tamir, Sandra, Medgar, George, Brianna, Elijah, Belando, Dante, Amir. Which one? Like it can't be all of them. Like it can't be the entirety of it. Destroyed brown bodies, dismantled homes, so demolition stands even as my fidelity falls. As it must. She erases my reason to, allows one answer to her only loyalty test. Yes or no, Michael, do you love this nation? Then hates me for saying I can't. For not burying myself under her fables where we're one. Indivisible. Free. Just. Under God. Her God. Grinding down to prayer for George Floyd. I woke to the news you were dead. The what arrived before daylight. The how was an agony unfolding as I dreaded my way to dusk. Unfolding against my want not to know. But I already knew. Have known since I could know. Officers. Arrest. Black. Man. 20. Video. Knee. Sir. Back. Dollar. 8. Counterfeit. Hand. Sorry. 46. Mama. Please. Breathe. Please. Were you tired, George? I feel tired sometimes. America on my neck. My lungs compressed so much they can't expand, contract, take in, send out oxygen, words. My dentist says I grind my teeth. My molars are wearing smooth. The next night, I jolted awake to find my fists clenched tight, some fight, my heart pounding fast, my mouth hanging open, slack, not tight that time. Just me, on my own, gasping for air 6 times a minute. A raspy sound. The world was darkness. My room was darkness. I lay in a state of in-between and thought of you, but also God. I wanted the sun, but did not ask. I hoped instead for a quiet dawn and peace for us. Real peace for us. I hoped so hard, it almost made a prayer. Hello, I'm Michael Kleber-Diggs. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library for inviting me. It really means a lot to me to be called forward and to be given an opportunity and a platform like this one to share poems. My heart is heavy. My mind was laboring today thinking about which poems I would read and finding myself unable to really talk about anything else other than this violence. My book, Worldly Things, came out last June, and I've really felt fortunate to have the opportunity to have the conversations that I wanted to elevate through the book. I wanted to write about three things: who I'm from, my family, a little bit about the story of my family, including the tragic loss of my father to gun violence when I was 8, where I live, which I think of as a racialized America, but also the upper Midwest, Minnesota and St. Paul and Como Park, and also where I'd like to live. This last poem, I have two poems left. This next one is from that second part and includes a mention of the first, but this is mostly just about where we live and how we live. It's called Back in Huntington, and it's written about a real person, resulting from a project that I participated in 2015, where poets were asked to respond whenever a police officer took a life. This is called Back in Huntington. In Northeast Indianapolis, a car collides with a fence, then a wall. Its engine whines in reverse. A pistol reports once, a windshield shatters, a man dies. Cars and trucks crawl by. Loose change bounces around a pocket while an ID is retrieved. Your name is now known, but not yet spoken. In Huntington, 100 miles away, the volume on a TV lowers to confirm a knock at the door. A few blocks down, a cell phone rings continuously in the purse of a woman about your age who makes sandwiches for a national chain. In Spring Hill or Rocky Ripple, a man throws his keys onto a kitchen table, then collapses into a nearby chair. His wife holds him to her chest, whispers assurances not hers to make. It was not your fault, she says. The day went sideways. It was him or you. In London, an intern adds your name to a database of those who died at the hands of police this year. You're a number 537. Joshua Dyer, age 34. Passenger in a car trying to get away. In St. Paul, Minnesota, a man joins those lamenting your loss. He was about your son's age when his father was killed by a different man in a different city with a different gun for different reasons. He imagines your father. He imagines your mother, sedated now, television off, resting when she can find rest in the same small living room where you played guitar for her 4 days prior. He imagines your son's mother, still wearing her restaurant uniform, kneeling down by your boy, age 5. She's trying to breathe through it and be strong for him if he describes what cannot be explained. The man in St. Paul imagines a point in the distant future, back in Huntington on a pleasant June day, when your son says, "Mom, tell me about Dad." And his mother will stop doing whatever she is doing to repeat her truth, and she will know it and know it. "Your father loved you a lot," she'll tell him. "He was tall and thin and handsome. He wore his sideburns long and thick, but kept his hair short like yours. He had the warmest eyes, so blue, and one eyebrow that went up high when he smiled, which he did often. He loved music. He loved playing it. He listened to it all the time. Your daddy made mistakes. We all do. But what happened to him was not his fault," she'll say. And by then it will be true. I'm pretty sure, she'll add, because it will matter to her to say it out loud to him every single time. I'm pretty sure you would have liked him too. In the third part of the book, I write aspirational poems for the most part, where I write about where I'd like to live. And in a way, that's kind of what I'm always doing. When I'm pointing at what's broken and what gives me despair, what's disappointing and sad and hurtful and hateful and violent. What I'm really trying to say is, what if we could find a way away from this? I want to close with a poem where I dream a little bit about models of restoration instead of models of retribution. After they left, we policed ourselves, restored our spirits in quiet tasks until the earth ran red with iron and sweat. We called old seeds from the cavernous cold to rejoin them with the heart-sick soil, then tended our crops by hand. Every day, everyone bent down on knees to pull the weeds away. Pests took their part, but left plenty. Each harvest, the village gathered together, to each a share. For all it had suffered, our body stayed whole. Trauma dissipated. Where our wounds were acute, we applied more salve, calling our injured closer in. As we sang to them and gave them more fruit. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you so much for bringing the poems into the space. I just really, I have a lot of gratitude for the way the poems work through things that are hard to look at and harder to look away from, and all of that. And we shouldn't like to look at it head on. The last poem you read, Mary.
The last poem is, it has what we call in the trade a running title. So the first line of the poem is also the title of the poem. In this case, it's called After They Left. Yeah.
And I'm glad you shared back in Huntington, because I wanted to ask about the sort of the construction of the book. And by the time I reached, I'll read poetry books often in pieces, but then going back through it in one swoop, just to see how it all talks to itself. And that poem in particular starts to feel like a braid or like a whirlpool. Everything, like all of the stories that are happening in the poem are in there, and it just all, I don't know whose story I'm in anymore, which is really, really cool. But its placement there feels just as intentional as the poems around it. So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about the way you chose to position the poems in world poems.
Yeah, thank you for that question. To start back in Huntington, we're shifting perspective and spaces all the time. There's this part in the early third, in the first third, where the police officer goes home and his wife says, "It was not your fault." She offers, as I say in the poem, assurance is not hers to make. We're in Indianapolis, we're in Rocky Ripple, we're in Huntington, we're in St. Paul, we're in the present moment when the police find out who it is they have shot. And we're in the past when we find out that the person who's speaking to us has lost their father when they were young. We're in the future when we imagine that the mother of the boy's father is speaking to him about the dad he doesn't really get a chance to know. And it's meant, I think, to be a bit swirling and chaotic and to jump about a bit. And it's also arriving near the beginning of the second part of the book. I have in the first part said, this is a little bit about my family. My grandmother is there. My mother is there. My father is there. We learn how my father was killed and things like that. And then in the second part, we start to talk about America, this setting where these things start to happen. And in the third part, understanding that these aren't discrete chapters, they're weighted on themes, talking a little bit more about writing and nature and the natural world and the kind of world that we can live in and ourselves in community with each other and what that would look like and what that would require. So back in Huntington, as it's arranged in the collection, allows kind of a segue and a little bit of a touch point. I had a lot of guidance on arrangement. I can't ever talk about the order of the poems without saying I had so much guidance on that from so many friends who had experience with that and good ideas to share. But thank you for seeing that and for asking about that.
Yeah, of course. It was just very, like, on that second read through, it was so apparent that everything was really talking to, back and forth, and it just somehow that pivot, man, it's working. It is right there. So good on all your friends and you for for sorting that one out. I find it impressive. I don't know how to organize books. This idea of community that you're speaking about really seems to be present in a lot of the books that have come, I don't know if that have come out this year, that at least that I've been noticing. Maybe it's what I'm choosing to read, maybe it's what's available there, but that longing for deeper connections and that view sort of across space. I'm wondering, because I do see in your book, in spite of the fact that the poems you shared, have that deep grief in them, there's a lot of hope, and I'm wondering how you find that for yourself, which is it's a little question.
Yeah. I believe that I've had to cultivate a sense of hope by necessity. I think that that's kind of resulted from the loss of a parent very early, and trying to figure how to go forward in the face of that. I've learned a lot of things from that. All of them difficult and some of them useful. But I definitely acquired a heightened sense for our fragility, how suddenly we can be gone. I have to say, this is a feeling that is particularly acute among communities of color. I think after Jamar Clark was killed, after Philando Castile was killed, after Dante Wright was killed, after Amir Locke was killed, after Philando Castile was killed, I think about how many times a similar fate could have befallen me. And so that immediacy is that fragility that's heightened in certain communities. Hope for me, speaking only for myself, has become a survival mechanism. I hope I live a ripe, long life. I really do. I try like crazy to order my life in a way that will allow that to be true. I can't know. I do really want to, within this time of a real difficulty where we're separated in so many ways from each other, to make time in my life for things that are beautiful and important, to make time for art, to make time for ideas that remind me of what's good about people, about our capacity for beauty and love and things along those lines. I feel kind of grand and philosophical, but I do definitely think that I've had to really figure out how to be hopeful. I think I'm wired for it in some ways too. I'm generally a pretty happy-go-lucky person, and in spite of kind of a person, almost a defiant interest in not letting it get to me. But I think that that's something I've cultivated over the years. That's a great question.
I adore the idea of defiant joy. I'm just gonna that's very vital and vitalizing. I really, yeah, I get that. I'm glad you can hold on to that, and we can all, let's be philosophical. Let's just
Right. Well, might as well. Right.
Yeah, here's a great question then. And there were plenty of questions in the pre-registration about your teaching both in schools and in the prison writing workshop.
Yeah.
And Lynn is asking, does your teaching connect you with hope?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. In both settings. So I'm in all the settings. So I teach as an adjunct when colleges and universities invite me to do it. And I am teaching this year and at the St. Paul Conservatory for Performing Artists, where I work with high school students on creative writing. And I have for 6 years now taught through the Minnesota Prison Writing Workshop. And I feel hopeful in that work in a variety of ways. Like every setting offers its different opportunities to claim that hope. So in graduate school, it's seeing the next generation of talent coming forward, the ideas that they're captivated by, the talent that they're bringing forward, the conventions that they're smashing and upending, and those types of things. It's hard not to feel energized in that space. In high schools, I want to pause and say a couple of things. The first is that this is my first time teaching in a high school. And I hadn't really been in a high school since I left high school in 1985. If you're wondering where the gray hair comes from. And high schools are wild. So first of all, like I just did the thing where I got there at a certain time, and I went to one room and talked about one thing, and an hour later I went to another room and talked about something else, and it just seemed normal, but it's not. It's like super weird, and it works well for some, but it doesn't work well for a lot of students. What I've seen in my time at SPCPA this year is a lot of students are going through a lot right now. It's the pandemic, it's the stress that that's placing on the community, on their families, on them. And if the high school students that I've seen, understanding that some appear to be doing just fine, or any indication, are young people, are people of that age, are going to need so much from us, so much support. And we're at present, it seems, many of us focused on other things, most of it staying at work and things like that. And I don't know how we're going to take care of that group in the face of that, as they're dealing with a lot of really difficult things, as they're struggling to understand all of these forces, the slow killers like global climate change, the threats that are persistent underneath the pandemic, and the agitation in our communities, some of it political, some of it institutional, some of it based in policy. And this is a time of rage and destruction, and it's a really hard time to be young. In the face of all that, they're writing, they're daring, they're going out and protesting as they did yesterday, and I feel hopeful in that. With respect to the students that I work with in Minnesota correctional facilities, I think what I've learned so many things in that setting, but with respect to this question, the thing that I've learned that feels most urgent is that we really can never give up on anybody. Like, we have these ideas about people that come from somewhere else. And I don't typically find out why my students are in prison. Sometimes in their writing, I'll get a sense for that, but that's not why I'm there. And I certainly don't tell them about my worst days. We're talking about writing. And so that's what we focus on. But I've met so many amazing, talented, intelligent, thoughtful, creative, caring, kind, just wonderful people in those spaces. And that gives me a sense of hope too. Their work gives me hope. Their thinking, their ideas, the passion behind their words gives me hope as well.
I think it's extremely important work on all sides of that. When I was working at Hamline, there's a class sometimes taught by someone in the criminal justice department, sometimes taught by someone in one of the social sciences, that does kind of an exchange and takes this class into the correctional facility, and everybody writes their story. And I had the honor of putting some of that together in a visual format, and I was struck again by how important it is for everyone to have a chance to be able to see and hear their own voice, and to be able to really ground into that ability to tell themselves.
Yeah. In their own words.
Yeah.
And to share it.
Mm-hmm.
And to be heard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's really, really good. And I think for high school students, finding how to express themselves, especially in this time when everything feels so laden. I asked my grandmothers once, like, how did it feel to live through times that were the bold headings in the history books? And now, like, oh, I know why one of them couldn't tell me anything. Like, it was too much for her she just couldn't, like, the one who had my grandfather had been fighting over Europe in World War II and almost didn't come back. And like, my mother was in danger from polio and all of these things. They're like, oh, okay, now I get it. Like, I get that overwhelm, because the layers are
Yeah.
But being able to write about it is great. So thank you for getting out there for folks. Danielle is asking, how did you come to Minnesota and why did you stay?
Yeah. I came to Minnesota in 1990 to go to the University of Minnesota, where I studied law. And when I graduated, and I had spent some time thinking about what I wanted to do, and you know, you leave a law school like the University of Minnesota and you have options, and I thought a lot about where I wanted to live, and I chose Minnesota, and I choose Minnesota today. My first year up here, I'm from Kansas originally, and my plan was to come up here, go to law school, and then go back home to Kansas where my people are, and a lot of my friends and a lot of people I love and care about live. But my first year up here, toward the end of the year, I went to the Lake of the Woods with a group of classmates, and we were up there, and I was on the lake, and I was just thinking, I think I'm going to stay here instead. My wife is here, her family is here, my mother has since moved here, we raised my daughter here, and I, in spite of everything, love Minnesota. So many people I love and care about live here. So many artists who I admire and adore and who inspire me live here, and that's all part of it. But where should I go? Where should I go? Work is wanted everywhere. And sometimes the jobs are different, and sometimes they arrive in a different extent, but there's no real place in America where I could go to have it different. It would just be an illusion or a different facet of the same underlying problem. So I might as well stay here and dig in and do the work that I want to do and live the life that I want to live.
Yes, and that throws me back to what I was hearing. Yeah, I guess, Danielle, I'm seeing you. Back to, great, because I am going back to Groundhog Day.
Yeah.
And that the way you are, well, I'll do Danielle first, because Danielle is wondering if she could see a printed version of Groundhog Day. I could share it with the people who are in attendance, if that would be okay with you.
Yeah.
And also, of course, to compensate you for your artistic labor.
So a couple things along those lines. As you might well imagine, I just started it not so long ago. All of it being fresh. Wendy, the version I sent you for closed captioning is a little bit different than the version that I have now, which is to say I'm still, I think, in the process of spending time with it, connecting to what I want to say. In point of fact, I made changes to it 5 minutes before I logged in. I just want to have this conversation. I want to do something to mark this most recent loss of life. I want to indict, quite frankly, the voters in Minneapolis who last November said, let's just kind of continue doing what we've been doing. I can't believe we're still doing no-knock raids after Breonna Taylor anywhere. I can't believe that. And here's the part that gets me the most, as I've, not to go too far down the field on this.
No, please.
As I've heard conversation around no-knock raids lately, the main goal is to keep people from flushing drugs when the police knock on the door. So this is not about drugs that led to the loss of Amir Locke's life. We put citizens in grave danger. We put police officers in grave dangers. We create the situation of chaos, all for the preservation of evidence. And in this case, the evidence is drugs. How long are we going to keep doing that? So I'm not going to go into that with respect to the poem. I kind of want to stay centered in a conversation about Minneapolis, which is, to me, at a real pivot point. I can't think about how many Black Lives Matter signs I saw in Minneapolis in 2020. And then the first opportunity that the city was presented to try to come away from their comfort to pursue a new solution on behalf of someone else, they couldn't do it. And last year I was talking to someone in a workshop setting, and they said, "What's the hardest emotion to write?" And for me, it's anger. Anger is the hardest emotion for me to express, period. It's constitutionally hard for me to express, but it's also an emotion that can get me killed. But I felt anger when I sat down to write. I'm not in the custom of implying that people are flakes or fakes or snakes. But I wanted to let that rage be what it was. I don't know of any other real response. And that's the honest one that was there. So I'm still tinkering with it. And, maybe I'll find an opportunity to share with the community when I feel more settled in the poem itself. I would not want compensation for a poem that I'm making in response to the loss of one of my neighbors' lives. I understand in art it can be a little hard to disentangle those things, but that's not what I'm hoping to do. And I appreciate the question and the sentiments behind it and the desire to compensate artists for their labor, but in this particular instance, my main hope would be just that when I feel more settled in it, it might be shared in a way that would allow conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying about that opportunity, that missed opportunity to do something good on someone else's behalf. Yeah, and I just feel like we keep that. I think that's my main frustration right now too, is that we keep as a city, as a state, as a nation, just sort of continuing to center I. And I think the thing that poem, and like working inside of that angst and that frustration, and getting into, I think that's why the snow was so powerful, because it's obscuring. And the thing I was noticing as I was listening to you read it was the different ways you were, the slipperiness, and the way I feel, people sliding away from each other, and the way attention just slides away, and clearing, you just, there's that constant battle to say, hey, this is still a problem. And I think that's why the work that you're doing in that poem is important. So thank you for that. But some of what you were saying, I'm trying to process here and collate things, but some of what you were saying as you were talking about it made me think of something that I keep with me. This was in, I think, a Min Post interview over the summer, and the interviewer asked you about the role of the poet in 2021.
Yeah.
And it reminded me of something that one of my teachers had said when I was like, I have an internal warrior that just is ready to throw fists, but I am in fact a Chihuahua. I am small and yappy and not particularly good. So anyway, she was saying that, you write in response to the things you find beautiful. And so you said, we absolutely need people who are making paintings that rage against the machine. And we also need people who are captivated by flowers. And we need all of those perspectives. And the role of the poet is to keep writing the poems that they feel called to write. And what you just said about needing to write the poem that you wrote made me You know,
Yeah.
that's great.
Yep.
It's right there. And I think one of the things that struck me so much, and I don't know where my question is in this, but it struck me so much in reading your book was the proximity of those things that cause frustration and rage to the things that are beautiful.
Yeah.
And because the beautiful things give the rage the weight it deserves.
Right.
Is that
Yeah. Well,
making
and also
sense?
why are we? Yeah, I mean, I have in the book poems about the killing of George Floyd, about the killing of Freddie Gray, and I also have what I call a love letter to my neighbor Bob, who passed away a few years ago, and a nature poem where I'm reaching out for connection to a poet I admire named Sean Hill, and it's all of it. It has to be all of it, and at the end of the day, I'm just writing about the things that command my attention. And I don't want to apply any particular kind of filter against what that's going to be. And it might be a newspaper article or an event that's happening in the community, or it might be a particular thing I notice when I'm out walking my dogs. And I want to say yes to all of it. I don't think, I think that a big part of what I'm feeling when I'm writing about what I notice that's broken is this desire for a world where we can focus on things that matter more. And I don't know how we find the motivation to be in community with each other, to extend humanity to one another, if we're not called to some of the higher options that are available to us: beauty, love, nature, sharing, joy, things along those lines.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I love this comment, Christy, about audio installations of poems throughout the city, like murals, but auditory.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that I love about doing these events is hearing the poems, because my mind responds differently when I'm listening than when I'm reading, and picking up different, you see the poem on the page and you get the line break and you get the punctuation, you can imagine what that's doing, but then you hear it and you're like, oh, there it is.
Yeah. And poets work in sound a lot, so there's a real benefit, I think, in hearing the poems. Also, I think hearing the maker read the poems, and I love all the unique ways that different poets can share their work.
Yeah. Do you find that you work, because I know you observe very, very closely all of these everyday things, but do you find that sound is super important as you're crafting? Or
less, for sure, not so much in crafting. Early on, I'm really thinking mainly about emotion and what it was that drawed me to my desk. Where sound opportunities are there, I don't jump over them, but I tend to think about sound and meter a bit more in editing. And I would not say I focus as much on those approaches as other poets do. But they matter to me. Yeah, those cadences and the sounds and opportunities there. Yeah.
the other thing I really wanted to ask was about those small moments that show up throughout the book, and like where does that come from for you? Those little things like, oh hey, that was an indigo bunting, and or I making a conversation with a therapist worth a poem.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just that sense of observing the everyday, where does that come from for you?
Yeah, I don't really know. I definitely, so in one of the poems you mentioned, Postcard to Sean, I'm going through a nature trail and a bird makes a sound, and then I wonder what kind of bird that is. And I think about my friend Sean, who's a poet and a birder, and I think he would probably know. Um, and I met Sean in a workshop setting, and he's taught us about the value of research and poetic practice. And so I also wanted to include this idea of research, that I researched it and figured out that the bird was an indigo bunting. And I did, by the way, in real life, try to figure out what kind of bird it was. And as near as I could tell, finding this online sound replicator, the bird I heard was an indigo bunting. So some of it is just really capturing the serendipity and coincidence that real life makes available to us. But I would also say that I kind of joke a little bit about it. It's a little kind of a little Red Riding Hood joke, but my mother and I both have really prominent eyes, like the better to see you with. Yes. And I think that one of the skills I focus on in my writing that I hope to cultivate in my artistic practice is the skill of noticing, of paying attention, of being present within the spectacular. And so a lot of times I feel like I'm just documenting and just benefiting from really good glasses and prominent eyes that allow me to see things, but also to notice similarities and opportunities within that.
Yeah, I think it's powerful the way turning a sharp gaze on the everyday sort of works to elevate anything, and I really appreciate that about your work. Everybody's like, oh wait, there's Zoom. You're teaching a loft Zoom workshop. Mary is really looking forward to that, and Leslie is saying, wait, there's a loft Zoom workshop.
Yes, that's true.
So yeah, check it out, Leslie. Check out our good friends at the loft. This has gone by so fast, Michael. It is almost 8 o'clock. I would like to give the audience a little bit more time to throw anything else out, but everyone should read Worldly Things. The book is absolutely beautiful. It works so well together, and it is what I needed to revisit this week. So I appreciate you, Michael.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And yeah, I don't want to.
Well, Wendy, if we have a little bit of time, I'll read one. I could read one more poem.
Oh, please do.
Okay. This is one of my favorites, I think. It's called The Grove. Planted here as we are. See how we want to bow and sway with the motion of earth and sky. Feel how desire vibrates within us as our branches fan out. Promise entanglements. Rarely touch. Hear our sweet rustlings. If only we could know how twisted up our roots are, we might make fast shelter together. Cooler places, verdant spaces, more sustaining air. But we are strange trees, reluctant in this forest. We oak and ash, we pine, the same, not different. All of us reach toward star and cloud. All of us want our share of light. just enough rainfall.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks everyone for being here.
Yes, dear friends out in the land of Zoom. We
That's right.
appreciate your attention and your time in this community tonight. I know a lot of you, I'm starting to recognize names. I see you, Fireside community, I see you. So I am grateful, and see many of you next week. And Michael, it has been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed this time.
Thanks so much, Wendy. I'll see you next month.
See you.
Yep.
Good night, everyone.